Good day everyone, my name is Clarissa. For today's activity, we will have a brief review on the previous activities we conducted, including the on-site training on FMS, the safe use of medical devices, specifically the mechanical ventilator conducted by the respiratory department, and the safe use of defibrillators, particularly the Soul series and the Schiller DifiGuard 4000 conducted by the biomedical engineering department. Now, following this presentation, an assessment will be conducted to evaluate your understanding on the discussed activities. Now, participants, you are all requested and reminded to please complete your names, particularly those with similar names, as well as your assigned unit and the number of years in the institution. This is for documentation purposes. Now, the result of all activities will be summarized and submitted to the nursing director. And again, for any queries, the Academic Affairs and Training is delighted to assist you. Okay, let us begin with the first slide. Mechanical ventilation is a form of life support that helps you breathe when you can't breathe on your own. Now, who needs mechanical ventilation? So, a patient may need mechanical ventilation during surgery because general anesthesia decreases your ability to breathe deeply enough on your own, or if you have a certain lung conditions or infections, or if a medical emergency that blocks your airway or impairs your breathing. Another is if you have a certain brain injuries or conditions, your brain might not communicate well enough with the rest of your body, including your lungs, to allow you to breathe properly. Or if you have any condition that causes your blood to have too much carbon dioxide, we term this one as hypercapnia, or not enough oxygen, and we term this one as hypoxemia. Or to prevent you from accidentally getting food or mouth contents like saliva into your lungs. So mechanical ventilation helps you prevent aspiration. In mechanical ventilation, a ventilator is used. So a ventilator is a machine that helps you breathe, just like the crutches that supports your weight. Now, the ventilator could partially or completely supports your lung function. Now, a ventilator provides oxygen to your lungs. It helps remove carbon dioxide from your lungs, and it provides pressure to keep the small air sacs in your lungs, specifically the alveoli, from collapsing. Now, the adjustment of setting of this machine to meet the needs or specific needs of our client is the responsibility of the doctors, the respiratory therapist, and the trained registered nurse. Okay, now moving on to the types of ventilation. Now, modern mechanical ventilators use positive pressure to push air into your lungs. Now, positive pressure ventilation can be invasive or non-invasive. Now, for the non-invasive ventilation, this uses a face mask connected to a ventilator. So, straps hold the mask to your face or to your head to keep it tight. Now, the ventilator pushes air into your lungs. The forms of non-invasive ventilation includes devices that you might need at home or even in the hospital like the CPAP or the VIPAP. Now, for the invasive mechanical ventilation, this means that you have a tube in your airway connected to a ventilator. Now, this tube can go through your mouth, so an intubation is needed, or to your neck, so tracheostomy tube is inserted. So it is they will surgically create a hole or a stoma, then this tube is inserted. Now to continue, let's review the types of tube inserted in invasive ventilation, including their indication and insertion sites. Now for the first image, we will see here the ETT tube or the endotracheal tube. This is a flexible plastic placed through the mouth or nose into the trachea or the windpipe. This is to maintain an open airway, delivers oxygen, and administration of anesthesia. Now for the second image, we have here tracheostomy tube. This is a small curved tube inserted into a surgically created hole. So this is a stoma in the neck. This is to provide a direct airway, usually for a long-term ventilation, airway obstruction, and secretion management. Now, I want to remind the trained nurses that client with tracheostomy tube, you have to remember the cleaning, the regular cleaning in the inner cannula and the stoma site is crucial. This is to remove the mucus buildup and prevents infection. Replacement. So the tube is changed. This is typically performed every 5 to 7 days, or we have to follow the policy of the hospital or as needed. Now for safety, a spare or a small or identical tube should always be available for emergency replacement. Okay, moving on to the next slide. So last month, the respiratory therapist department explained to us a brief settings of the mechanical ventilator. Now, as shown in this image, the mechanical ventilator is set on AC/VC mode, meaning the assist control mode, the type is volume control because we have another type which is called the pressure control. Next, we have the VT or the tidal volume. This is the amount of air delivered with each breath. Now, for delivery protective ventilation, the normal range is from 6 to 8 milliliter per kg based on ideal body weight. Now, we have to remember that the tidal volume is based on ideal body weight and not the actual body weight of the client. Now, how to compute this one? We can use a divine formula. So, the height must be converted first in inches, then use this formula. So, for male, 50 plus 2.3 for each inch over 5 feet times height in inches minus 60, and this will determine your male ideal body weight. Then for female, we have 45.5 plus 2.3 times height in inches minus 60. Then this will be your female ideal body weight. Then after that, we can now determine the tidal volume. Again, the range would be from 6 to 8 ml per kg based on ideal body weight, or approximately 400 to 530 ml per breath. Now, we have to remember that in ARDS or acute respiratory distress syndrome, the lower range is preferred to prevent lung injury. So they usually use approximately 400 or the 6 ml per kg based on ideal body weight. Now, moving on to RR or the respiratory rate, this is the number of breaths per minute. The normal setting is from 12 to 20 breaths per minute. Then we have the FiO2 or the fraction of inspired oxygen, percentage of oxygen delivered. So it ranged from 21% room air to 100%. Then we have the PEEP or the PEP or the positive and expiratory pressure. This is the pressure left in the lungs after exhalation. This prevents lung collapse, and typically it starts from 5 centimeter of water. Now, we have to remember that the tidal volume and the respiratory rate represents the ventilation, and the FiO2 and the PEEP represents oxygenation. Another example of a ventilator setting in a non-invasive ventilation is the so-called CPAP mode. CPAP stands for Continuous Positive Airway Pressure. So this CPAP delivers one constant pressure during both inhalation and exhalation. So this keeps the airways open the entire time. Now the CPAP is used if there is an oxygenation problem. So an example, we have obstructive sleep apnea, mild respiratory distress, and sometimes it is simply used to improve oxygenation. Okay, let's continue. Now, if the problem is oxygenation plus ventilation, then the ventilator is set to BiPAP mode. BiPAP, which means bi-level positive airway pressure. Now, when we say ventilation, the patient means that he is unable to blow off the carbon dioxide. Now, the BiPAP mode delivers two different pressure. The IPAP, which is the higher pressure when inhaling, and the EPAP, which is the lower pressure when exhaling. Now, the common uses of BiPAP mode includes COPD exacerbation, the ARDS in some cases, patient with elevated CO2 or carbon dioxide. So we term this one as hypercapnia. So pointers, we have to remember that the parameter PEEP or the positive and expiratory pressure in the invasive mechanical ventilation is equivalent to the CPAP of the non-invasive mechanical ventilation, wherein it prevents lung collapse, so it keeps the airways open the entire time. Now, the PEEP is also equivalent to the EPAP in the BiPAP parameter, which is the lower pressure when exhaling. Okay, now let's move on to the indications of mechanical ventilation. So the first one is respiratory failure. Now this is generally classified into two main types based on whether the primary issue is getting oxygen in or getting carbon dioxide out. Now there are two types of respiratory failure. So we have type 1 and type 2. The type 1 is called hypoxemic respiratory failure, and the second one is hypercapnic respiratory failure. Now, the type 1 respiratory failure is defined as failure in oxygenation. So it occurs when the lungs cannot adequately transfer oxygen from the air into the blood. Now, the clinical marker for this is this one. So the partial pressure of arterial oxygen is less than 60 millimeters mercury despite supplemental oxygen. Now, the physiology for this is mainly on the gas exchange problem inside the lungs. So the primary mechanisms include the VQ mismatch or the ventilation perfusion mismatch. We have the shunt and the diffusion limitation or impairment. Now, the VQ mismatch, this is the most common cause. So parts of the lungs receive blood flow, that is perfusion, but not enough air or ventilation, or it could be vice versa. The second one is the shunt, wherein the blood exits the heart without even participating in the gas exchange, or the blood bypasses the ventilated alveoli completely. Then the third one is diffusion limitation or impairment, wherein the alveolar capillary membrane is thickened or it is impaired, making it hard for the oxygen to cross. So common examples for the type 1, we have pneumonia, wherein the alveoli is filled with pus or fluid, so it blocks the oxygen. Then another one is pulmonary edema, wherein the lungs is filled with fluid, often from heart failure, which interferes with the oxygen crossing into the blood. Another example is in ARDS, wherein there is a severe widespread of inflammation and the lungs become stiff. So the stiff lungs interferes with oxygenation. And another example is the pulmonary embolism, wherein a clot blocks the blood flow to a ventilated areas of the lungs. Okay, next we have the type 2. We have the hypercapnic respiratory failure. So this is defined as a failure of ventilation. So it occurs when the body cannot remove enough carbon dioxide, leading to the buildup of acid in the blood. Now for the clinical markers, so we have this one. The partial pressure of arterial carbon dioxide is greater than 45 to 50 millimeter mercury. So typically this is accompanied by a drop in the pH. We call this one as acidemia. Now for the pathology, this is often a pump problem rather than a lung problem. So it occurs when there is, number one, reduced minute ventilation, so the patient isn't breathing deep enough or fast enough. Second, there is an increased dead space, so air is moving but not reaching the areas where gas exchange happens. So the third one is muscle fatigue, so the diaphragm and the intercostal muscles simply wear out or it gets tired. Now, common examples for the type 2 respiratory failure, we have COPD or asthma. So the airflow is, there is an airflow obstruction, makes it difficult to exhale carbon dioxide effectively. So there is an air trapping. The second one is drug overdose. So opioids or sedatives suppresses the brain's drive to breathe. Another is neuromuscular disorders. Conditions like Guillain-Barré or myasthenia gravis, it weakens the muscle used for breathing. And another example is obesity hypoventilation syndrome, wherein the excess weight on the chest wall makes it physically difficult to take adequate breath. Okay, let's continue with the second indications of mechanical ventilation. We have here the protection of airway. Now, even if the lungs are healthy, the patient may need mechanical ventilation if they cannot physically keep the airways open or prevent aspiration. So first, we have altered mental status. Example, we have drug overdose, massive stroke, or head trauma. Now, in altered mental status, a common rule of thumb is that at GCS less than 8, you have to intubate. This is not an absolute rule. There is one article that I have read. It says there that GCS of 8 is not an airway assessment. So it's still critical to check for the respiratory status of the patient. So you can ask the patient if they are responsive, or we can observe the patient. Is the patient belly breathing? Do they have tracheal tugging? Because this is one of the clinical signs of respiratory distress. Now, tracheal tugging is the downward movement of the trachea during inspiration. This is seen or felt at the neck just above the sternum. Now, tracheal tagging suggests increased work of breathing and strong negative intrathoracic pressure. Another is loss of reflexes. The inability to cough or the absence of a gag reflex increases the risk of inhaling secretions or gastric contents. So this may also indicate mechanical ventilation. Then another is the impending respiratory muscle fatigue. Now, sometimes you intubate the patient not because of their current blood gas, but because of their clinical trajectory. There are two things to consider here. First, the signs of tiring out. Now, using accessory muscles or paradoxical chest wall movement or extreme tachypnea, example, respiratory rate consistently more than 35 breaths per minute. So this can be an indication of mechanical ventilation. Another, we have the crashing patient. If the patient is working so hard to breathe that they are becoming exhausted, mechanical ventilation is started before they go into full cardiac arrest. Then another also is the neuromuscular weakness. So Guillain-Barré syndrome, spinal cord injury, myasthenia gravis, and even muscular dystrophy. These conditions weakens the muscles for breathing. So this may also need a mechanical ventilation. Then another is clinical or surgical necessity. Now, in surgery, general anesthesia typically requires a secure airway and controlled ventilation. So, especially for thoracic and abdominal surgeries where neuromuscular blockers are used. Then we have also shock and hemodynamic instability. So, mechanical ventilation is also needed because in severe sepsis or cardiogenic shock, the work of breathing can consume up to 25% or more than the body's total oxygen delivery. So venting the patient offloads the diaphragm, allowing the oxygen to be diverted to vital organs like the brain and the kidneys. Okay, so next time when you are exposed to this scenario, you will no longer feel anxious because you already have the basic knowledge of why our patient is connected to a ventilator. Now, except of course for the ICU staff who are already experienced in caring for ventilated patients. Okay, so previously the Biomedical Engineering Department conducted an orientation on the safe use of defibrillators, specifically the Soul series defibrillator as well as the Schiller DifiGuard 4000 defibrillators. Now, the orientation covers the operation, functionality, components, preventive maintenance or the PPM, and the proper reporting of malfunctioning units. Okay, now what is defibrillation? This is used to treat a life-threatening cardiac arrhythmias where the heart is no longer able to pump blood effectively. Now, defibrillation is performed in cardiac arrest when the patient has shockable rhythms, and this include ventricular fibrillation or VF and the pulseless ventricular tachycardia. Now, ventricular fibrillation is the rhythm of the heart here is chaotic, which means completely disorganized or irregular with no clear pattern or coordinated electrical activity. Now, in ventricular fibrillation, the cardiac's electrical signals are random and erratic. The ventricles quiver instead of pumping effectively, so there is no effective cardiac output. So this is a life-threatening emergency. The patient will be unresponsive and pulseless. So this requires an immediate defibrillation. Now, the second one is pulseless VT or ventricular tachycardia. This is a life-threatening cardiac arrest rhythm where the heart is beating very fast but not producing effective pulse. So there is no effective blood circulation. So the key features for pulseless ventricular tachycardia is that rapid, regular, wide complex rhythm on ECG. So the patient again is unresponsive and there's no pulse detected. So often it progresses to ventricular fibrillation if untreated. So the management as per ACLS approach includes start CPR immediately, defibrillation, unsynchronized shock, ASAP, and continue the cycles of CPR and shock. And then you have to give medication as per protocol. For our final slide, we have cardioversion. This is a medical procedure used to restore the normal heart rhythm in a patient with a certain abnormal heart rhythms or arrhythmia. So it helps reset the cardiac electrical activity so that it can beat normally and effectively again. Now for the types of cardioversion, we have pharmacologic or chemical cardioversion. So medications are given to convert the rhythm back to the normal. The second one is electrical cardioversion. So a controlled electric shock is delivered to the heart. Now the shock is synchronized to the heart rhythm. So usually this is done in a monitored setting. Now, for the nursing consideration, so we have to ensure informed consent when possible. NPO status is preferred when sedation is used. We have to monitor the vital signs and oxygenation, and need to have an emergency equipment and resuscitation drugs available. Now, in summary, cardioversion is used when the patient has still pulse and the shock is synchronized, while defibrillation is used for cardiac arrest rhythm, specifically the pulseless VT or ventricular tachycardia or the ventricular fibrillation, and the shock that is used is unsynchronized.